I think that I've, for quite a long while, believed that conflict is an issue that isn't being given the right kind of attention in many organisations. It shows itself in many different ways, for example in bullying, in narcissistic leadership, and in the way that organisations actually very often encourage individuals to be in conflict with each other in a very unhealthy way. So I felt that actually this was a topic that really needed to be wrestled with quite strongly. Frontline managers are a very important audience, as it were, for the book. Obviously they are dealing with staff issues every day. They're often the first to become aware of a potential dispute when it is emerging, and therefore they're best placed to actually stop a conflict from growing into something which spirals into something very unwieldy. So what we've tried to do is to put quite a lot of focus on the role of the front end of conflict management, as well as the back end, which is obviously key as well. There we're talking about the formal disciplines of mediation and escalated conflict management. But for managers, really bringing this down to a very practical level, looking at the different kind of scenarios where they have to intervene in potential disputes, and giving them the skills and the knowledge and the practical, very simple, accessible tools to do that. I'd been working with Jackie, who at the time was a client of mine, and we found that we had a lot of common ground and common interests. Initially our focus was primarily around coaching, but through coaching we increasingly began to discover that a very common theme was conflict. Jackie's very extensive background in policing, but also acting as a mediator and as a grievance investigator within the Metropolitan Police and elsewhere, prompted, I think, an awareness that we both had something to contribute on the subject of conflict management. And the idea for a book was born one evening over a glass of wine, and we haven't looked back from there. My own experience is quite different to Jackie's. I spent most of my career working in consultancy, and had actually worked for a very wide variety of clients in different environments and in different countries. And of course over that time you become very exposed to the harmful effects of conflict, as well as observing situations where conflict can be very healthy. So I suppose I've really come at my main contribution to this book has been a little bit different to Jackie's, as in her case a mediator and a grievance investigator. In my case it's been more as an observer, as someone that has worked with clients to try and help them through particular difficult situations which have often involved conflict. Coaching has played an important part in that. I trained as a coach, as well as operating as a consultant. And I suppose, if I'm honest, I've also taken a little bit of a slightly more theoretical look at conflict as well. I've been very engaged in the research behind what we've written, and obviously when we've been able to talk with many people who have been in the front line, as it were, and actually bringing in Jackie's experience as well, the theory has been brought to life by real experience. The book aims to help fill what probably is a little bit of a gap in terms of considering the real end-to-end management interventions of conflict, and particularly putting emphasis on what we describe as a golden hour period, which is when managers especially can play a very crucial role in recognising when a dispute is arising, knowing how to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy conflict, and then actually channeling that energy that the two parties are showing in a very constructive way. So a part of what I would hope for the book is that we can actually help managers see why it is very useful for them to actually step in and take this topic seriously, and therefore prevent disputes running their full course and going through mediation and reaching litigation. Another important audience are leaders in organisations, and what I hope we might achieve is to raise the profile of why conflict is or should be such a key issue, and take it much more seriously. Because I think if leaders in organisations can recognise how much time and energy and money is spent managing conflict and appreciating the negative consequences of narcissistic types of leadership and bullying and so on, then they may be more inclined to actually really want to get a handle on this. I think that conflict is such a key issue in the workplace because the drive to be in conflict is actually written into our genes. It has been since the time of Neolithic man, and indeed that's something that we allude to in the book. Conflict is encouraged by many organisations in the form of aggressive competitiveness, in terms of encouraging a sort of progressive dynamic within organisations and in other ways too, and is not always unhealthy. There certainly is a very healthy form of conflict which should be encouraged and does play an important role in driving the way that individuals work together. That's something that we do discuss in the book. But I think very often the emphasis is too much in the wrong direction. And it happens also that once a dispute arises, that there is still a drive that seems to be instinctive to human beings to need to win over another person. This idea of having to have the last word, or seeing justice done. So without controlling and being able to manage conflict effectively, especially from an early stage, it has the tendency to drift into a very bitter downward spiral that can be very destructive to not just the individuals involved, but very destructive in terms of its impact on other people as well, and the time and the energy and the productivity that clearly should be of interest to any organisation. I think, if I'm honest, I believe that many organisations that I've worked with don't take conflict nearly as seriously enough as perhaps they should, given the cost that not managing conflict effectively, given the cost of not managing conflict effectively. There's seems to be that most organisations will reflect what they believe they need to do in terms of staying within the law, within, for example, HR policy, or within performance management systems, and what's laid out in terms of a manager's responsibility. They may provide a fairly basic level of training for frontline managers in how to deal with disputes, and perhaps then focusing much more on formal mediation. But somehow the ethos of managing conflict as a core management discipline doesn't really seem to be that strongly enforced. So I'm convinced that there's a lot more that organisations can do to help themselves by taking this whole topic much more seriously.